Daniel, it's a pleasure to meet you today for our, I don't know how millionth webinar, but this is our first one of 2021. So it's great to start with you and this new partnership we have with Payoneer. The usual thing is when we start with a guest is to start with a fun fact about yourself. So I think you've prepared yourself for that, and I'm all ears about your fun fact.
So I thought I'd incorporate a bit of travel in there. So I'm a keen traveller myself. I was meant to be going to Georgia and Scotland and Albania last year, but didn't quite get around to it. So hopefully 2021 brings that. And aside from that, I've been trying to spice up my life and incorporate a bit more activity into it. So this weekend on Saturday, I'm going to do a blue plaque tour of London, which is going around all of the famous people's houses that have lived in London. So Gandhi, H.G. Wells, and these sorts of people. They've got blue plaques in their houses. So we're going down 50 houses to check them all out.
And you do by in running, or how do you, or
So
is it?
we're cycling. We're cycling. So the idea is to jam the day full and have a bit of an adventure when you can't really have an adventure any other way.
Well, that's good. I thought you wouldn't be able to do that in those days in London, but if you can, that's awesome.
Counts as exercise. So
Okay,
as long as you don't stop, you're good.
cool. Well, that I would love to do that. So,
Yeah.
fortunately, London is a bit far, and restrictions won't let me do that. But that's I like your fun
But
facts, and that's a good one.
I think you've got to try and strive for as much adventure and activity in these days as you can. I think that's definitely been one point that I've looked towards and try to maintain it. You kind of run out of things to do, so that's how we're here. But yeah, I think it's important to stimulate your mind in that way.
Right. Awesome. Very good. So now maybe the more serious, some people would say boring about, what a bit about yourself and Payoneer and what you do and how you help sellers on Amazon, maybe.
Yeah, so I work in the partnership side of Payoneer. So I work with people like e-commerce and other providers completely across the space to help stimulate us to find clients and help clients with our working capital solution and our payment solutions, as well as helping them to grow on a global level. So on the working capital side, we saw a gap in the market whereby we that it's undersupplied. So typically, and we'll go into some bit more detail later in the conversation, I'm sure, but typically the banks are quite hesitant to lend to Amazon businesses. It's quite difficult to find a good financial package to grow your business if you don't have working capital funds available to you at the present time. So that's our goal now as a business, with the ability for us to have that alongside our payments product and to have that alongside our ability to push you onto different marketplaces around the world to encourage global growth. And that's what we've done with a huge amount of our clients since we've been around since 2005.
Yeah, it's like it seems to me that I knew Payoneer since ages, that you know this name from you've seen it everywhere. So yeah, it's sort of kind of a name which sticks. At least I have this feeling that you've Payoneer's been around for like as long as business has been, same as PayPal or others. For me, it was like
Mm.
in the back of my mind. So yeah.
I think PayPal were lucky in the sense that they got there first, but obviously their service has a lot of flaws to it, cost being one of those. But they were lucky they could monopolize the market and be first there. And we're the second company behind them if you look at it on a global level, and we're really trying to close that gap, even though that gap is pretty large because nobody's got close to them before. But in terms of the market that we serve, marketplace markets, and the business that we do, we're strong, and hopefully with a bit more funding as well along the way and a bit more growth, we'll be able to get there. I'm very
Hmm.
optimistic about that.
Very good. So I've seen that you were talking about mentioning three things, and every good thing this can be explained in three different parts. So I like to go one by one. Then the first one you were talking about the working capital, the second one you payment solutions, and then the international expansion. And I think all three make sense. Let's try to dig into that and what it means to sellers today. So first, you're helping mostly sellers and not vendors, correct?
Yeah, so sellers primarily in the Amazon space. Yeah.
Okay, so that's great. So it's on Amazon. Could it be on other marketplaces today or?
So that's a very broad question if you open it up. So on the e-commerce side, we're focused on sellers across the whole industry. So we run all of Walmart's payments on their marketplace, for example. So we're responsible for paying all of their clients around the world who they work with. And I know that's an area that a lot of Amazon sellers are looking towards as well. Outside of that, we obviously work with a huge amount of Amazon sellers in the e-commerce space. But if you were to take a step backwards and think of the gig economy more generally, all of their or a large substantial amount of Airbnb's payments are going to be are made through Payoneer. So although you won't see it when you book an Airbnb, the people who are hosting the Airbnb, they'll have a Payoneer card and they'll be extracting their funds via the Payoneer card. So a similar story goes with people like Getty Images as well, and Amazon themselves, Google themselves. So across the payment space on the gig economy specifically and the internet economy, we are deeply embedded, but this conversation is obviously going to be centered around marketplace sellers and specifically Amazon sellers in this case. But our scope is pretty huge.
Yeah, so shows your understanding of that space, right? So yeah, shows some credibility on your ability to help sellers grow. If you name Airbnb, it's not a small, or it
Mm.
wasn't a small gig. Not those days are not
Yes.
very favorable, but yeah. Um, So the first thing is working capital. So like not everyone here is got a financial background. Maybe how would you explain sort of working capital for the dummies?
So working capital as a concept is your current liabilities. So that may be your stock, your cash, minus your no your current assets, minus your current liabilities. So your current liabilities being fixed assets that you need to pay for and being bills in general. So that's the basic calculation of working capital. What that effectively means is how much cash do I have to play with after the day-to-day running of my business. So how much cash do I have to prevent exposure for costs that weren't imagined and unforeseeable costs, and how much more importantly do I have to help my business grow, right? You can run the day-to-day business and then that'd be okay, but ideally as a seller, I think anyone in the space and in business in general, you want to grow that business, and that's what having a surplus of working capital to work for you enables you to do.
So working capital is basically helping the cash flow, right? It's like as a seller, you want to grow your business, so you need to buy more before you sell more, and
Yeah,
there's a gap, and you're bridging that gap, correct?
yeah, effectively.
Cool. So and we'll go back to it afterwards, but so the second one is payment services, and it feels to me that probably that's the one people know most. So, but could you give some details about that
Yeah.
payment solution?
So on the payment side, this is our what was our core business until the last 18 months or so. We've kind of refocused and gone for a wider approach. But the payment side, we were the first payment providers to do what we do. Now, the people who are going to be watching this, the sellers you work with, they will be using a payment solution. And there are various names in the market that you could throw around. But Payoneer were actually the first to introduce the marketplace receivables solution. So it is a core strong product of ours, and that essentially means that you can open up bank accounts around the world through one portal and access cheaper, localized domestic payments and move the money around more cost effectively. So that's what we have come from. And as such, that product is the strongest in the market. We can cover every Amazon marketplace. So that may be Amazon Mexico, Amazon Canada, Amazon USA. And we're the only provider that can actually do that. So that's our bread and butter, and that's where we've come from. But now we're looking at bigger opportunities.
Okay, so if I put it in my own words, it's like you're in Europe and you want to sell in India, or you're in India and you want to sell in the States, and you don't want to open a local bank account, and you don't want to have huge fees with putting your own local, yeah, European bank account in India or vice versa, and so you ask PayPal to create a one which will have less fees, correct?
Payoneer.
Payoneer, they would.
So yeah, so what we do, it's infrastructurally, we work with partner banks all around the world. So we effectively have an agreement with these banks that we can resell their products on a local domestic way, in a local domestic way. So if you were to try and open up a bank account with Citibank in the USA and actually have a local bank account there, you would need a premises there. It's a really stressful thing to do. Alternatively, we have an agreement with them that we can sell them on the internet for them effectively, and you can access localized payments in all of these 10 currencies around the world as if you're actually based there. I mean, the cost savings for that alone are worth thousands on thousands having to incorporate your business, having to set up your business. So we completely get rid of that and eradicate that. And then with the movement of money, all of the money that we move moves as a domestic payment. So traditionally, your bank would have to send it to an intermediary bank, and then it would work its way from the sender to the receiver between 3 and 5 days. With Payoneer, we send everything as a local payment. So instead of actually moving the payment globally, you would simply take the money here, pay the money here, take the money here, pay the money here, and balance it out on a domestic level. So it's a really interesting product, and as I said, that is our bread and butter. And in terms of ability, in terms of cost, in terms of the amount you can transact, we are the strongest in the market for that.
Hmm. And you said that it's for 10 countries, correct? That 10
Yeah,
currencies or
yeah. So 10 currencies. So you can have a US dollar, Canadian dollar, stretches all the way to China, to Japan, to Australia. So it is the widest scope out of any of these fintech international banking offerings. And it is a strong product infrastructurally.
okay. So you do have the yuan in China. That's quite impressive.
Yeah, so there are some limitations with regards to China being one, and it would be with marketplace payments. So for the guys that are running this call, they probably wouldn't be receiving that much in China anyway. But if they were to go to Amazon China or marketplace in China, we would have the ability to set the account up there. Obviously,
Hmm.
it's a quite a regulated space, so we would need to be working with a marketplace ourselves, and we do work in marketplace ourselves to offer that function.
Cool. And so we come to the third point, which we're talking about, like expansion, international expansion. Could you enlighten us a bit on how you help
Yeah,
international expansion? Because that's one thing we follow and we believe is one of the huge opportunity of Amazon and e-commerce in general.
yeah, I think it is for sure, and I think there are numerous stories of sellers that we work with where we can align. Well, I'll rewind. To say we're working with an Amazon seller who's based in the UK. The He's missing a complete opportunity on the global level. But what does he actually need to expand outside of the UK and Amazon and internationalize on Amazon? Well, firstly, he needs the payment network in order for him to do that, in order for him to collect the euros. And that's primarily the problem that you solve initially. But then you think he needs the money in order to expand. If he wants to expand his product line in the US, if he wants to expand further in Canada, it's quite difficult to get that financing otherwise. So then we give him the financing. But then how does he actually touch base with or find markets that you can sell his products in? And this is where we finish that off, and it's really polish off the article whereby we can make introductions to different marketplaces around the world. So this is beneficial to the marketplace that we work with on sending their payments out. So the likes of Walmart, who we send their payments out, and all of these different marketplaces around the world, Jumia, C Discount, that we work with on an enterprise level. We can also work with them by referring sellers to them. Now that obviously benefits the marketplaces that we're introducing clients to, as well as supports the clients that we're actually introducing to expand faster. So this is a really good product, and it's one that we see a lot of value in. So what we can do is we're working with a seller. He says, I want to sell on Walmart, I went to sell on Cdiscount. We've got an internal team that would look at that seller, determine the suitability of that seller to that marketplace, look at their product line, look at their size, and look at certain characteristics of them that would make them interesting and successful on these other marketplaces. Then once they're happy, they'll pass it through to a member of the team, let's say a Walmart, Cdiscount, wherever it might be, who would then determine it again. And then you'd be put in touch with an account manager. From the client side, that will take a day, maybe 2 days to do. If he was to do that himself, it would be impossible to do. And you would waste a lot of time maybe applying for marketplaces that you aren't relevant to, you wouldn't be successful with, where the competition's too high. We do that for you with our network very quickly, very easily. And that allows us to create this whole package whereby we can pick up a seller and expand you. It benefits us because our clients are more successful. We get more clients because we do a good job. It also benefits us because they're running more payments through us, and it benefits the client themselves. So it's a great service, and it just makes sense, really.
Mm. And would you have an example to make it a bit precise? Let's
Yeah.
say I'm a brand, and let's say I want to expand into the US. So I'm based in Europe, and I want to expand into the US. How do you help specifically on the last service, like the payment, the working capital? Will go back to
Yeah.
it. The payment, like helping in payments, it's very clear. Now on that side of connecting with marketplaces, how do that work typically?
So we've got the personal relationships within the marketplaces themselves. And also, another way we can help with this is that in each of these countries, we have a team. So we've got a US team that sits in New York. We've got European teams that sit in Europe. We've got Chinese teams that sit in China. Teams around the world. We've got 25 offices around the world. And with each of those teams comes a group of partnerships like we have in Europe that are relevant to that country. So we also have the ability, as well as having a point of contact within the marketplaces themselves, to be a point of contact for the client in question. We also have the ability to surround them with localized partnerships and services that we know are good services that we can get discounts on in order to help that client grow and do well in that region.
Cool. And that means, for example, if I wanted to be a bit
Like
specific,
a,
as yeah,
a
I'm
logist
you. Yeah, cool.
like that could mean, for example, a logistics company that could help in the US, or some that specializes in translations to a different region. A good, interesting example would be on the Indian side. So we've got 3 teams that sit in India in 3 different cities, and they've got very close connections with Amazon India. A lot of the hires we made in that region were actually from Amazon themselves. So a good example would be our route into Amazon India. What we can do, and we're the only provider, probably one of the only pathways into India in this same way,
Yeah.
is that we have a relationship with Amazon India. We've got a relationship with an Indian bank who support us in extracting that currency from India when you make the sales. And we've got a relationship with it's almost like a third party reseller, because you can't actually issue your own products onto it. It would be the seller's products that they're selling, and they would have control over that, but it would go through our third party in that sense. Now, we were able to build a product whereby we bring all of these together and make them work together and understand each other's role in the relationship, so that our top sellers in the UK who are interested in looking at the Indian market can do that. And without that solution, they would have to go to set up a bank account, find a way to extract US dollars from Indian rupees. That's a very messy situation with the way it's regulated. They would need to set up an entity, etc., etc., and it just becomes a lot more complex. So that's probably the best example of how the localization can help. And as I say, if you're looking to sell on Amazon India, for example, you don't really have many other options than that, because it requires such a combination of different services to provide.
That makes a lot of sense. And so you're a bit like a hub, basically of connecting, so of making like money flow, but also information connections, and boosting people's business, right?
Yeah, I think that goes naturally with how we work. So maybe that's happened organically. So in every region, we're going to have partnerships like with yourself, with services we can work with in order to benefit the clients. And then after a period of, well, 15 years, when you've been doing that, you really build up solid networks in these locations. And a good part of Payoneer's business strategy in general, and it's been commented on by various publications in the past outside of the payment or Amazon space, is in its hyperlocation, they called it. So it's a business strategy whereby you have small teams all around the world, but you have numerous offices around the world, and you effectively allow them to run it themselves as small businesses, encourage entrepreneurism and hire entrepreneurial people. And over that was how we started in our globalization. And over time, those offices have grown at a tremendous rate. So the London office, for example, 3 years ago, probably had there were about 7 of us in there. Now there's about 40 of us. So it's gathered pace very quickly, and it is that hyperlocation, hyperlocalization, which has
Mm.
enabled us to have this influence around the world. And definitely in the space we operate in, there's nobody else that has done that to the extent we have. And in general, I think it's an interesting company, and how it's run is super interesting. There's not many companies that do replicate that business model, and it's worked to success for us.
Yeah, it's quite impressive. Now, if we dig into working capital,
Yeah.
so working capital is about, okay, helping the cash flow, if I put it very simply. Could you explain how that works? Like, I want to expand. I'm selling baby products in Europe. I'm quite successful. I want to expand in the US. I would probably need 250,000 pounds. How can you help me?
Yeah. So I think in every one of these cases, it is very unique to a business. So whether it might be their expansion to the US, for example, they would need to invest in a number of different things. So they would need to invest in their stock levels, marketing, and basically build a whole new business there. So they need money and they need cost effective money and money that is dedicated to an Amazon seller. So the problem that was there originally is, and it still is to an extent, is that there's a lack of financial services available to an Amazon seller specifically. A lot of the sellers that I talk to that we work with previously, they've either gone through their bank, but the rates are astronomical. Even from a small business that we work with to a multi-million turnover businesses that we work with that we've spoken to directly, the size doesn't really matter. Even if they're huge, they still see there's an issue with regards to raising finance from banks themselves because they purely don't understand space. So then you look at other ways in which you can do that. Credit cards, but it's expensive and you only have 30 days. And then yeah, there's not really many other ways apart from personal funds or family funds or friends that are going to lend you money, or really rogue investment opportunities. So where we would plug in there is that we would give you capital in order to achieve that growth, but at fair rates and in a fair structure. So the product that we have is we can effectively, and we can offer you up to £500,000, but that would be the total of your monthly turnover on Amazon. So in your case, if you want 250,000, you would need to be turning over 250,000 a month, which some sellers do, um, just in the UK. And then we would give you that. You would effectively have that money. You'd repay it over 3.5 months, and you'd be charged a low 3% fixed fee on that. So there's no interest involved with that. And there's also no guarantees and no credit checks, which is quite unique for the sum of money that we're offering there. The advantage for someone in that situation is that with that capital, you can get the capital, right, which is hard enough. But with that capital, you it's a lot more risk averse, if you like. You're not securing it personally against your house, which maybe if you need that sum before, that is what you'd have to do, which adds some pressure, endangers your life in some way personally. Um, and it's an easier way to receive that money. So that's effectively how we help in that situation. And when you look at the broader market, there's not an awful lot out there. There's PayPal lending who offers something similar, but astronomical rates. And then there's Amazon lending, who again have high rates, and there's a lack of flexibility. But if we rewind, that's the guy who's selling into the US needs a specific 250,000. But I think another way to look at it, and this is equally as important, is to identify exactly where your problem lies and then to invest into that problem. So it could, to exemplify, it could be somebody who has large stock levels. His business is running well, but he knows that he needs to do marketing for this stock because he's struggling to sell this stock, and it's sitting there in a warehouse, and he needs to sell the stock. He needs to sell the stock in order to generate a return, right? And his business is stagnant at the moment, but he knows, and he knows, he's done his research, he's done it before, that if he was to employ 10, £5,000, whatever it might be, in PPC, in marketing, that stock will sell. It's just getting it out to the relevant people. And he knows if that stock sells, his profit margin is high enough that he would draw a profit on that. This is a good case for us to step in and say, we'll give you X amount of money, up to 100% of your turnover. If you only need a tenth of that, we'll give you that. And you can repay that over that 3.5 month period. He markets, his stock sells, and then he's able to get more stock in. Maybe without us, he wouldn't have had any liquid cash to put into that. And with us, he's managed to sell his entire stock and move on to whatever he has to move on to next. So those are two different cases, and I hope that goes some way to explain how the capital solution can be integrated in different scenarios where it fits.
I think it's very clear. In my own words,
Yeah.
so you're providing money easily where banks are making a lot of fuss and checking risks and so many checkings that in the end they do nothing. And so you're very simple. The caveat to that is that the people need to have a very fast turnaround time. So in the sense that a very good, what I would call a very good conversion rate. So that it means that if they invest in advertising, for example, it will turn into sales, or that if their product is like a very high demand product, because like 3.5 months
Yeah.
when you're launching a new product is probably a bit dangerous to commit to being able to pay back all of it. Like
Yeah.
if I take an example of going into the US, if it's like a completely new market and your brand is not well known, it's probably a bit risky to expect to be selling back in so short period, right?
Yeah. And that's similar to maybe a capital investment or something like that, where you want to repay over, where you want a large sum to repay over a long period of time. Situations like that, you're probably correct in the sense that you may want something a bit more long term. But having said that, the way that we structure our product is that you would only repay as a percentage of your future sales. So the caveat to that is that it is more attractive to somebody to take funds to limit their fixed costs in the future, whereby with an Amazon lending, for example, you pay back a set amount every month. That is a fixed cost. Maybe to somebody who wants to mitigate that and move it to a variable cost where you only pay for it effectively when you're seeing sales come into your account, then that's where we have a strength there. But I think in general with working capital, it's as I say, an area whereby Amazon sellers haven't really had that much experience with before because it's not readily available to their specific line of business. But I think what you need to do is identify what your needs are and then identify what product is going to fit that need. Now, I'm not going to say here, I'm not going to sit here and say that Payoneers by Capital will help you buy machinery, because it won't. It's not suited to it. And I think the education point of view, from the education point of view, a seller needs to understand the different options. So if I need to increase my stock level, then I'll go for this. If I need to buy new machinery, I'll go for this. But if I need to launch in a whole new market, then I can find a solution here, um, and then understand the consequences of each one.
I think, yeah, it's like you don't want to be, especially in financial services, you don't want to oversell, and you want to be very specific about what you're solving. And I think the use case of saying, okay, they need to invest in PPC and advertising, paid search makes a lot of sense, because then if you have the right product with the right mix and the good conversion rate, then adding traffic to it, you will turn around, and that will help your ranking, and then organically that will grow your sales. So that makes a lot of sense. And it's true that banks are not very good at understanding what's happening in e-commerce. Most of them
Yeah,
are very traditional. And like, what's your take on that? It's like, I've always been surprised that banks don't get it.
yeah,
It's like if you talk to them about e-commerce, they say, "Yeah, show me your balance sheet of 5 years ago, and I can tell you the future." And it's
yeah,
like, wow, that doesn't work out this way.
yeah.
What's your take on that?
I think banks. It depends which level you look at it, right? So a big bank, they don't really need to look at e-commerce specifically, and I think it's going to be a massive missed opportunity. The further we go down the line, they probably will involve themselves more and more within e-commerce and within the space. But there are two things. I think initially it's a lack of need to service the market. And why do you need to if you're helping construction firms build massive skyscrapers, or whatever it is the bank is doing and has been doing for years and been seeing profit from it? It's a risk reward. Why are you going to take the risk on e-commerce and e-commerce sellers or the like when you've got proven business things that have been flowing for years and years? And typically these organizations are quite regimented and they do things in quite an old school manner, whether that will be the banking infrastructure, whether that will be even things like insurance and financial services. In this context, I think a lot of them are very, very old fashioned in how they work. Um, so I think there's a lack of wanting to go into it or needing to go into it when you can see profit elsewhere. And I think it's also just a lack of being informed about it. I think it's easy to sit here as someone who works in e-commerce and has worked in e-commerce for the last 5, 10 years to say, wow, there's a massive opportunity. Why don't they invest here? But the truth of the matter is that somebody who works in a bank may not even know that there are so many Amazon sellers that are purely just sellers on Amazon, that's their main source of business. So to service them is a completely different story. And typically the strategy will come from the top down. And if somebody is sitting there chief of strategy at an investment bank, then why would they turn to e-commerce? I think the tide will change, and certainly with the downfall of the high street, who the banks have been supporting and who the banks have been putting money into, and doing things like bonds and buying bonds and selling bonds on their basis and helping them finance the retail space. I think when that goes down, which inevitably it's looking that way, at least that space is going to be converted into something else, then they're going to need to look for customers. And I think that's when they'll go to e-commerce. So I think a lack of need, a lack of interest or understanding, and also how do you approach those markets? So for someone like Payoneer, potentially there will be institutional investment into people that can approach and understand sellers like we do, and potentially down the line, banks will look to partner with, whether it be a Payoneer, whether it be another provider, who knows, and then they'll enter the market that way. But it's very difficult to enter a market that you know very little about overnight. So I think that's also another reason as well.
Yeah, and it goes very well with what you were saying about, yeah, having an approach of like when you're investing in a machine or when you're investing in a tool, and when you're investing in something to help you grow, or
Yeah.
the tool to help you grow your business on online. And that's where, yeah, you're right, probably you need really specialists. One thing I wanted to go about is like you said, 3% is very cheap. Some people could say, wow, with today's rates, it's for 3 months, it's actually quite high. What would you respond to that?
So it depends in which way you look at it. So it's simple in the fact that it's not interest binding, it's just a fixed fee. And it is cheap relative to the market. So if you look at the market for an Amazon seller, there's nothing else on the market that can beat it on a price point of view if Amazon is your sole income. I think that if you can look to start to compare it to other sources of finance, and maybe for somebody who maybe has a presence in normal retail as well as e-commerce, they probably will be able to find other forms of finance which would make it look expensive. But I think for the solution that it serves and for the market that it sits, that it really is pretty affordable. And you can also frame it in a different way. So there aren't many solutions that offer the flexibility that it does offer. If you have a profit a product that's got a profit margin of 20% or 15% even, and you're just having that 3% taken from that profit margin, then you can look at it may not be cheap as such, but we need to make money somehow anyway, and the opportunity cost is a lot larger than the cost of the capital. So depends where you look at it, and you can look at it in many different ways. But ultimately, for what we're looking to do, we're looking to empower clients who don't have that capital ready available, and for them to play in the market they're going to play in. If they know they're going to see a return, then it starts to look cheap. If you're having 3%, 3% of something is better than 3%, or is better than no percent of nothing. So depends which way you frame it, and depends what you compare it to. If you're just looking at capital from an e-commerce perspective, then the closest thing in terms of how the product is and is structured, closest thing would be a PayPal working capital, whereby it starts at 4% and goes all the way up to 25%, I think, depending on how you structure it. So in comparison to that, it looks very cheap. So it depends where you look at it, and it depends which lens you frame it in. But it's certainly got its need, and it's certainly got its gap that it fills in the market.
Yeah, it makes sense. And probably you can look at it as like you're looking at advertising and your A costs or your tech costs, where you say, okay, I'll put 10% of my sales into advertising. Then you say, okay, and then you've got your FBA cost and the
Mm,
Amazon commission, and you just say, okay, you've got this extra 3%. So it comes down to your business model and your margin structure. Maybe because we're getting a bit at the end of this session was all of these learnings, and maybe as a parting thought or parting thing is, what would be your recommendations for sellers to improve their working capital or cash flow, and what would be your recommendation with your experience of helping them, a number of sellers grow their business and help them on their
yeah,
financial side? What are the best practices, let's say, or your
yeah. Well, I think you need
recommendations?
to. There's a few things, and it's an interesting time to be alive and to be functioning in space as well at the moment. So, firstly, you would need to understand. You should understand what your working capital ratio is. So that's the difference between your assets and your liabilities. By understanding that, you can understand how much you have to play with. So if it balances out completely, your ratio would be one. Ideally, it should probably be between one or two. If there's any higher than that, you probably have cash that you should be putting into the business. So I think they should understand that for one. And whether they do that themselves, whether they have the help of an accountant to help them do that, that's important. Two, I think that Amazon sellers specifically, and all of us in some way, are in a lucky position whereby you can afford yourself a position to reduce your fixed costs completely. And I think that's key. If you could replace your fixed costs with variable costs, then your working capital solution, your capital position should strengthen. You're not liable to things unless you sell them. And there's a lot of ways in which you can incorporate with specialists within the space. So people like yourself, um, people who help you with your stock and things like this. You can also maybe, instead of employing, as I said, employing a marketing person, you could use someone like yourselves to help with that. You could employ a VA to reduce your costs. So reducing your costs is key. I also typically somebody would state that you should extend the period of time it takes you to pay somebody and get paid faster. Now, in this time, that's pretty insignificant, and that would be pretty poor advice. Obviously, with Amazon, there's no way you can speed up that process. They pay you when they pay you, and there's not an awful lot you can do about that. You could even incorporate a solution like ourselves in that sense to bring forward future sales effectively and give you that cash then if you wanted to. That's something that some of our sellers do. But other than incorporating a solution there's not much you can do. On the supplier side, that's also something you can't really do at the moment. Is the supply chains are what they are, and if I was a supplier and there are it's quite fragmented as it is, and we're in the situation we're in, then don't think I'd appreciate somebody asking to extend credit to 90 days, 100 days, whatever it might be. So I think that's out the window as well. And I think a lot of people will find themselves in a situation at this moment in time whereby those things, and specifically putting it on the supplier themselves, aren't relevant anymore and won't be relevant for the next year probably. And if you need to find some capital, then there's not really much else you can do other than reducing your costs. And if you reduce your costs to the minimum you can get them to, but you need to increase your working capital for whatever business need it is, then it's probably worth looking at something external. And also, I think if you can speed up your cash flow and optimize that as best you can, then that's key as well. I think if we go back to the seller who has loads of stock, can't sell it, there's no good sitting on it and waiting for a rainy day. You should employ some additional capital potentially to then speed up that process and clear up the whole flow and the cash flow. So I think ensuring that your costs are low or not fixed is important, but also speeding up the time it takes to work through the sales cycle is also important too.
Okay. Makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much. Do you have an example, just as the last thing, is a maybe a seller, you don't need to give names or brands, but of which have been successfully doing that and seeing like their business have grown, just to give a bit of
Yeah. So I've got a good example of it's a rug seller in the UK, and probably the largest, if not one of the largest rug sellers in the UK, who is a fan of our working capital solution. Their problem is effectively that they sell too fast, and that with the time it takes to receive that money from Amazon, and with the capital they need to put up front to their suppliers to get more rugs shipped into the country, they're obviously quite expensive things in general, and they're expensive to ship. He runs out of cash. Well, he was at this period in time, and this was last year, for the duration of last year. So although it might not be the situation now, who knows? At that time, he couldn't keep up with the sales, and there were periods where he knows he can sell the product. He wants to sell the product. There's no questions there. It's just he hadn't had the capital to invest into that problem. So we supported him with pretty large amounts of capital, I think 250, 300,000, which he employed into his business, and then kept his business growing, kept it turning over, and kept the cogs in motion. And yeah, he grew as a business and he was successful. So we see these examples time and time again, whereby whether it be stock, whether it be marketing, a lot of the sellers especially when you look towards high high value sellers, but not limited to by any means. I think people who are analytical can see where an investment of capital uh, will produce additional profits. And if you're very confident in that fact, and you know that if you have X amount of money, you'll turn it into X amount of money just by processing it through your business, whether it be the raw material, whether it be the marketing, whether it be the stock, that's a position where we really do help businesses. And that's a position we want to be in because that business will grow and there's no risk attached to that money. And I think there's a lot of businesses out there that can sit there and say with a lot of certainty, if I had an additional 10,000, 20,000 to invest here specifically, my results would be this. And if you can say that, then there's really no reason why not to. And you need to find the most cost effective solution, maybe, but the most flexible solution, the solution that involves less risk. And I would, again, having looked at, from a non biased point of view, having looked at the market, there aren't really many ways in which you can get capital. And when you compare our solution to the rest of the market, from sellers that I work with, it is the strongest, and it's for people to make their own mind up, but it's certainly good to be aware of.
Yeah, so what I take from what you just said, which I find very interesting, is that actually Payoneer will not make you successful, like will not make your product successful. It will make your company successful if your product sells well. Like the for me, the first principle is like you need to have a very good product and be sure that this is selling well and you're converting your
Yeah,
conversion rate is very high, because
I think
otherwise it doesn't work. It's like,
not
right? No?
maybe not necessarily a good product, but a good system in place where if with your business, which this is a lot of businesses out there will have the same thing. If you have X amount, you can turn it into. I know if I'm a farmer and I've got X amount of cows, I can turn that into X amount of milk and sell that milk for X amount. And I know that if I simply scale it up, I can make more money. And there are a lot of sellers out there, and this is the perfect solution. I think if you can't see that in your business, then maybe that's a bit worrying to an extent. But I think if you
Yeah,
can
no.
identify where you can add,
It,
where you can input that money and you know that you can get money out of that money, out of that
yeah,
investment, then it's positive.
my point is that if you're a farmer and you believe each cow will give 100 liters of milk per day, and some people believe they can give 100 with their own cows, they can do 100 liters, but even 200 liters, that actually they only deliver 100. Maybe their own cows are delivering 20 liters.
Yeah,
That if you like, you can get 1,000 cows, but it's still 20 liters, so your output is not that big. So that's my point about conversion rate.
okay,
It's like,
yeah,
what I meant is that, and for us, it's very important for people to understand this Payoneer solution will help you if you have really something which is proven success, in the
yeah,
sense that you're already selling, and you're seeing that when you've got 1,000 people or 100 people, like at least 8 or 10 are already buying. If only
yeah,
one is buying, you could get thousands. It will cost you a fortune, but you'll still have like a very little number of people coming. So what I mean is you need to
yeah,
have a
yeah,
kind of interesting return rate. If you have a good mix, it probably sounds very basic, but it's like we meet a lot of people, and some people are, wow, so excited, but you need to make sure you make a business case out of
yeah,
it where
yeah,
you've got real numbers. And
yeah,
that's like on Amazon, you need to prove yourself that it's working before you probably need to put
yeah,
a lot of money. So it's a chicken and egg thing, eh? But it's
yeah,
probably before sending a lot of money, you need to prove that the conversion rate is high. And perhaps that's the parting thought of the day. And thank you very much. It's very uh, I believe I get the feeling in Europe, a lot of people, the banking system being so traditional, that the money is not probably moving as quickly as it should be, at least to support companies to grow on e-commerce. And I think the solution given by Payoneer is really a good one to support sellers, yeah, to get to the next step if they have a good concept in place.
yeah,
That's
yeah, for
so
sure, 100%. But thank you for
great.
your time. It was a great
Thank you
chat.
very much,
It was a
Daniel.
great chat.
learned a lot of things today. Thanks a lot. Have a great
Cool.
day, Daniel.
Thank you, Jerome.
Yeah,
All the best.
yeah. Bye bye.